But you don't want this bar too close to the rear axle, obviously, because it's going to hit the coilovers. Before I get too all-fired crazy, I'm going to take this coilover out. Hello everyone, welcome back to Maverick Mods. We're back on the Firebird. For those of you who have been following along, for the last few weeks I've been doing all the fabrication and modifications necessary to get the new rear end into the Firebird. That started with mounting up the torque arm. I followed that up with fabricating both the trailing arms and the brackets on the rear end for the trailing arms and the coilover mounts. This week we're going to work on the Panhard Bar. So sit back, grab a bucket of popcorn, let's get started. The third part of the puzzle on the rear axle setup on the Firebird is the Panhard Bar. We need a Panhard Bar in this circumstance because for those of you who don't know what a Panhard Bar is, basically it's a link that laterally locates the rear axle in relation to the car. Or in other words, it centers, or whatever you want to call it, the rear axle in the car, but also allows for suspension travel and suspension movement. In a leaf spring car, you don't need a Panhard Bar because the leaf springs do a pretty fair job of keeping the rear axle located laterally. But since the leaf springs are gone and we're now using trailing arms, they don't do anything. So we do have to have the Panhard Bar. So what I've done is I took the old bar. This is the one that came from the Z28. Got just a wee bit smashed up in the wreck, which is kind of a shame because I did a couple of basic measurements and this bar is about 1 inch too long for my application here on the Firebird, which would be, if this thing hadn't been all torn up, I could have just lopped an inch off of this thing, stuck a new heim joint on it, stuck a new spherical rod end on it, called it a day. But I am going to have to make a new bar. The good news is, with this bar though, I did take the bushing out. It already came with a polyurethane bushing, so I don't have to get a new bushing for it. So in this case, it's going to have a spherical rod end on the rear axle side, but it will not have an adjustable rod on the frame side. And the reason for that is there's no need. There's no need to have adjustable ends on both ends in this circumstance. Next, we need to go into the car, take some basic measurements, and just kind of look at how the bar itself is going to mount. I did recenter and relocate the rear axle. We're back to, again, exact ride height and exact centering with the rear axle. I did take the coilovers loose at the top mount only because, again, because of those springs and the fact that the springs are just a little bit too long, I couldn't get the axle up to ride height. So I did just take them loose. I need the springs for one measurement. And obviously, I'm going to use the old bar for an example. So the Panhard Bar is just going to sit back here. It's going to mount to the rear axle on the driver's side, and it's going to mount to a bracket on the frame that I'll fabricate on the passenger side. But you don't want this bar too close to the rear axle, obviously, because it's going to hit the coilovers. So I do need to offset it enough that nothing interferes. So the basic measurement there, the spring itself, the outer portion of the spring, is just a hair under 4 inches from the rear axle. So just to give myself a little room, I'm going to set the bar on both ends. I'm going to measure both ends. I'm going to set the bar at 4 1/4 of an inch aft of the rear axle. So we're checking the other side just to make sure. My spring is 4 inches, or the aft edge of my spring is 4 inches aft of the rear axle housing, which means that my bracket coming from the housing needs to, I'm going to give myself 4 1/4 of an inch for the edge of the bar, plus I'll need to factor in the width of the bar to get the center line of the bar. So I'll do a little bit of math here in a minute to figure out how far out my bracket needs to come off of the axle so everything clears. We've got a basic measurement. I need 4¼ inches. .9 inches. Okay, so basically I need to go 5 inches behind the axle for the center line of the bar. All right, so we're done with the math part. Just in the basics, and again, there's no need to get really complicated with this. So for all intents and purposes, I need to locate with the Panhard bar. The rear end needs to be centered and located laterally, but it still allow for my suspension travel on both sides. So in this case, I'm going to mount my Panhard bar at the rear axle, and it's going to come across, and then there's going to be a bracket that's going to locate it to the frame rail. And there's no rhyme or reason. Well, okay, let me back up for a second. There is a rhyme or reason for Panhard bar or track bar, whatever you want to call it, mounting positions relative to what you're doing with the car. And this actually is important when you're doing circle track, if you're turning left turns all the time, or if you're turning right turns all the time. Which side is mounted which way actually does make a difference. In our case, this is a street car, it's occasional track car, but we are doing turns both left and right, so we don't have that option. So in this case, I'm going to mount the axle side on the driver's side, frame side on the passenger side. Let's make this real simple. Good rule of thumb is that the bar obviously needs to be horizontal at right height. Now, you might ask yourself, well, why should I make a bracket here just to make this bar horizontal? How come I just don't mount the bar up to the frame and run it down to the axle? Good question. And the reason is it has to do with the arc that is imposed that the bar is going to have. In other words, if the bar is going to pivot here, then it's going to, and this is exaggerated obviously, is going to move in an arc down here. So if I mount the bar here and the axle here, then as the rear axle compresses up, the entire rear end will shift to the left, which is undesirable. Same thing is when the axle goes into extension, then the entire rear end would shift to the right. Obviously, we don't want that. So we want this, that's why we want this bar horizontal. I was really getting into doing the whole whiteboard presentation, talking about Panhard bar, mount locations, roll centers, left turns, right turns, doing this, doing that. And it dawned on me about halfway through, just going crazy on the whiteboard, that no, that's way overcomplicating things. So let's continue. I'm overcomplicating this even for myself. We're going to go up underneath the car and we're going to make some brackets because it is not this complicated, I promise. I had to get fancy on this template just a little bit. I actually had to make the whole shape before instead of just doing one piece at a time. So let's stick it up in here. What I'm really looking for here is that I've still got my 5 inches, or excuse me, 4.9 inches for spring clearance. And if anything, I'm a little bit past that, which is a good thing because I can always trim it down a little bit. All right, I'm going to cut some metal and we'll see about making this a reality. Okay, so I got my bracket pieces fabricated up, tack welded in place. Let's do a quick test fit. Everything fits well and fits nice. Let's do a quick measurement. Just as an aside, I'm having to use this really heavy-duty tape measure because I can't seem to find my little slimline one with the green case. If you guys have seen that, let me know, because I'm looking for it and I can't find it. Also, I seem to have lost my little magnetic light, rechargeable light. If you guys have seen that, let me know too, because I really could use both of those. All right, back to this. So 5 inches is going to put me right here. My rod end is actually going to sit right in here. I'll show you how I'm going to incorporate that here in just a minute. But this thing looks good, so we'll work on the next phase, which is actually, well, I got to get it on the bench to show you. Here's my Panhard Bar bracket, and let's see, we're going to show you from the inside here. So picture the rear axle mounting right here, and the bar is going to come out this way. Now, in order to maximize my travel, I don't want to mount the rod end this way because it's going to be pivoting like this. So I want to mount it this way. So it's going to slide right in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure out from where my axle edge is going to be, my 4.9, I call it 5 inches, and I'm going to put a plate right up in here. I'll put a boxing plate on the outside that will be just the width of the spherical rod end, so it will slide in and my bolt will go through this way. So let's fab up those pieces. Okay guys, we're back under the car. I've got my piece welded and I've got my spherical rod end mounted. Basically I just created a pocket where that will ride inside. So basically it's going to come right here and sit just like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to level this. I'm going to tack my bracket in a few spots, and I will create a boxing plate for the bottom, but I'm not going to weld that in until I fully weld it when the rear end is out of the car. So we'll do a quick level here. So the bracket's tacked in on the axle. Next up, I'll work on fabricating the bracket that'll come right here on the frame to catch the other end of the Panhard bar. I went ahead and cut my first template for the Panhard bar frame mount. Now, my intention here is I want to straddle the frame rail and also tie into the edges of the frame rail plus a little bit of the floor as well, just to spread the load as much as I can. And I also used my handy dandy tape measure to get a basic height. You can kind of see it right here, and that has set in the height of my this end of the Panhard bar too. So I've got everything close to where I need it to be, and so I went ahead and cut this, and I mounted the portion of the end of the bar as well, just so I can do some eyeball measurements here. And I'm going to wind up setting just about right there. I've got it pretty close. I might need to trim an edge here or there, but I am really close. And next up, I'll need to actually fabricate the bar, because since the bar is going to be slightly less in diameter than the width of this sleeve, I'll need to make up my bar so that I can get my distance fore and aft set properly for this first brace. All right, status update here. Let me get a little bit of light going. There we go. Okay, so I put the Panhard bar together, basically welded the ends. That's essentially no different. Got the end there with the spherical rod end welded up. That's basically no different than doing the trailing arms, so I spared you that. Just a bunch of welding, a little bit of primer to keep the bar from rusting until I can re-sandblast it and epoxy coat it and paint it properly. I went ahead and did some measurements, got my front plate situated where I need it to be, and went in and tacked a few spots just to hold it. Alright, so rear plate straight from the plasma cutter. Well, okay, I did hit it with the grinder a little bit to knock the slag off, but let's go ahead and hook everything up. See how they fit. I knew it, well, before I even go in there, I knew I was going to have to do quite a bit of trimming, and my first bit of trimming, I can already tell, is going to be up there. That's quite a bit of trimming, actually. Before I get too all-fired crazy, you know, I'm going to take this coilover out because I don't want any kind of damage to happen to it. All right. Because now that I have my first plate in, first bracket in, I don't need the coilover to verify spacing anymore. Okay, so all right, let me trim that off. We'll try it again. Test fit number 2. Okay, so that's helping me out. I need to bevel my edges here a little bit to get it up in there. I'm still going to have to take a little bit more off the sides there, but I'm closer. Test fit number 3. Test fit number 4. Closer. Number 5. A lot closer. Test fit number 6. Test fit number 7. There's the final fit. A little rough around the edges, not too terribly bad. Oh, that's still hot. Got a little cleanup to do. I've got to trim this edge right down here a little bit to match the other side so I can box it in. But otherwise, it's essentially ready to move forward with. The rear plate, aft plate, whatever you want to call it, is in. I've got it tacked in. And I also made a, this thing's probably still a bit hot, also made a, I guess you could call it a doubler plate, block-off plate. I don't want a whole lot of water and debris to be able to shoot all the way up into this cavity. So I just made a plate here to block that off. Angled it a little bit too, just so that I don't have any interference issues with the bar as it, in this case, would be in full extension. So what I got to do next is coat the inside of everything. I've got everything tacked on the inside. I'm going to perimeter weld the outsides. So I'm going to coat everything very generously on the inside with weld through primer so that it doesn't rust from here on out. And then I will make my block off plates, or my boxing plates, both for the inside and the outside. And this guy will be done. And just for giggles, I know this is still a little bit hot. Let's see if I can see if I did everything right. This should be a relatively tight fit, but this bar should come out fairly easily. Yep, that's just about the right amount of fit. Okay. Okay, last piece of the puzzle are my boxing plates. So I've got them cut, fit, and of course I'm overlapping the edges just slightly here so I can get maximum penetration on my welds. So there's the outer one. Paint's actually still, the etching primer is a little bit wet still, a little bit tacky. There's the outer one. I'll show you the inner one real quick. Okay, so here's the inner.
So this one fits right up in there. All right, so we are ready to go. I'm going to tack these in. So the final welding on a lot of this structure on the body itself is not going to happen until I get it off of the jacks, back on the rotisserie where I can get a little bit better angles and a little bit more comfort for welding. But I'll go ahead and tack these in and we'll put everything together so you can see kind of the semi-finished product. The Panhard bar slash track bar slash whatever you want to call it is as done as it's going to be until I get the car back on the rotisserie where I can finish the welds. Actually, when the rear end comes out, I'll finish the welds on the axle mount there. But so there it is. Next up is the sway bar and the sway bar mounts. I've got a working plan for that. I'm got parts on order. I'm waiting for them to come in, and so we will continue with the sway bar when my parts come in.
Well, that's going to wrap things up for this week, guys. We got the Panhard bar installed. Brackets, well, they're not fully welded yet. When I get everything back apart and get a little bit better access, they'll be fully welded, ready to go. Last piece of the puzzle for the rear end is going to be the sway bar, and I've got a plan for that. That'll be upcoming here in a few weeks as a little bonus. Although I can't put it in today, maybe here in a few days. I actually did get my little tire wheel checker thingy, got a little test on it, and so that'll be upcoming here very shortly about just checking to make sure the tires are going to fit and I did everything right. So I certainly appreciate everybody watching. Big thanks to everybody. Please like, share, and subscribe. Certainly does help me out. Everybody, have a great day.